The princess had not spoken in 12 years. Cal Renner, drinking the last of his water in the shadow of a fallen god, did not yet know this, but he would learn it, the way a man learns most important things, too late to be ready for them. The god was a telephone. That was what the Sanu called such things. A telephone the size of a grain silo, half buried, its receiver tilted up toward a sun the color of brass. The cord ran out into the dunes and disappeared, as if the call had been long ago and the line cut by something patient. Cal had walked under the lip of the receiver and sat with his back against the cool painted metal, and now the bottle was empty, and he had perhaps a day, perhaps less. He was 36 standard. He had been on the planet 4 years. The colony ship Carolyn had broken up in low orbit on a maneuver no one in the briefing room had thought to game out, and Cal Renner, engineer, 2nd class, formerly a soldier, had ridden a piece of hull down through atmosphere clinging to a webwork of safety straps and a curse he repeated like a prayer. He had landed in a desert. There had been other survivors. There had not been, after the first year, other survivors. He had taught himself to find water by the way the sand cracked. He had taught himself to walk at night and sleep at noon. He had not taught himself how to be alone, because no one teaches that and no one learns it. You only get used to it the way you get used to a limp. He saw the stilt walkers at dusk. There were 5 of them on the ridge to the west, very tall against the bruised sky, taller than men should be, and for a moment he thought they were a shape his mind had made out of his own thirst. Then one of them lifted what he understood slowly to be a long bone flute, and blew a note that bent like a wing, and the others turned with it. Cal Renner saw that they were not men at all. Their legs were stilts, real stilts strapped to longer, slimmer bodies, copper-skinned, second-dilated against the sand. Their faces were narrow, almost beautiful, with shallow horns at the temple and a fine pale down along the jaw that caught the last light. They wore wrapped indigo cloth. They wore knives. He stood up and lifted both hands and waited to be killed. He was not killed. An old one came forward, not on stilts. Her legs were her own, and they were thin as reeds, and she looked at him with eyes that had a film over them like the inside of a shell, and she said something in a voice deeper than her body. He did not understand the words. He understood the tone. It was the tone of a woman who had survived a great deal and had decided on the spot to survive a little more and to let him survive too. Her name was Isulai. He would learn that later. He would learn she was 207 of her own years old, which was not so much by Sanu reckoning, but was enough that her granddaughter no longer remembered her mother, only her. They took him to the wells. The wells of the Sanu were not what he expected. He had thought he understood deserts, and he had thought a well was a hole. These were caverns, wide rooms hollowed below the dune line, stone-lipped, lined with woven mats and the dried hides of long-legged birds the Sanu hunted with slings. The air down there was cold and smelled of salt and animal. Children stared at him without fear or welcome, only a flat, unblinking interest, the way a child looks at a season. He understood quickly that the Sanu went into the wells every night. Not for cold, for hiding. Isulai sat him down with a clay bowl of something thin and green and watched him drink. When he had drunk, she pointed up, at the woven lid that closed the well above them, and she said a word, Maku, and he saw her granddaughter, who had been watching him from across the chamber, flinch. The granddaughter was perhaps 12 standard by the look of her, although later he would understand that Sanu years and his own did not move at the same pace, and that she was older inside than out. She was tall already, as all of them were tall, and her copper skin was paler than her grandmother's, almost the color of poured honey. Her hair was the color of wet ash, and she wore it loose. Her eyes were the deep green of bottled glass at the bottom of a river. She was very still in a way he had only ever seen in soldiers and in monks. She did not speak. He thought at first that she did not speak because she was afraid of him. Later he learned that she had not spoken at all, to anyone, in 12 years. Her name was Unien. She was the daughter of Isulai's lost daughter, which made her a princess of the Sanu only in the loose way that any last living child of a line is a princess. The Sanu did not have crowns. They had memory, and memory ran through Unien the way water runs through a stone, invisibly, and out the other side and gone. She had been 7 of her own years old when what the Sanu called the pale years had come. The dunes had glowed at night. Her father had walked out into the glow because his sister was out there. He had not come back. Her mother had walked out after him. She had not come back either. Unien had been found 3 days later, sitting at the lip of the well, looking up at the sky, and she had been looking up at the sky ever since, and she had not said a word. That first night in the well, Cal Renner sat with his back to the wall and watched a child who would not look at him and understood, with the slow, sad lurch of a man recognizing another wounded animal, that whatever had broken in her was the same thing that had broken in him. They had both seen a sky open up and take everything. He did not try to talk to her. He only, after a while, began to hum. It was a tune his mother had hummed when she pinned washing to a line, on a planet so far away he could no longer remember the color of its sky. It had no words anyone living remembered. It was only a shape in the air. He hummed it with his mouth closed and his eyes on the ceiling of the well, and he did not look at the girl, because looking at her would have been a kind of pressure, and pressure was the wrong thing. She did not respond. He did not expect her to. He hummed the tune through twice and then he stopped, and Isulai, across the chamber, gave him a long look he could not read. That was the first night. In the morning the Sanu came up out of the wells and counted each other and went to find their birds. The birds were ostrich-like things, tall and stupid and beloved, kept loose in the dunes and tracked by feather. Cal walked with the herders because no one had told him not to, and because walking was what he knew how to do. The boy who walked beside him was called Tavik and was perhaps 15 and had decided with the casual brutality of a teenager that Cal was now his project. Tavik taught him words: sand, bird, knife, sun. The word for the giant fallen objects in the dunes was not, as Cal had assumed, a word for objects at all. It was the word for image. The Sanu called them images because they were not real, only pictures of something that had once been real, dropped here by something that did not understand it was dropping the pictures and not the things. The thing that dropped them was the Maku. Tavik spoke of the Maku in a low voice, and the way he spoke of it Cal recognized, because he had been a boy once who had spoken of the war that had killed his uncle in just that same voice. The Maku lived in the north. The Maku had been left behind by the gods when the gods went away. The Maku was not alive, but it was not dead either, and once a moon it woke and emptied its belly into the desert, and the dunes filled with telephones and washing machines and clocks the size of houses, and any Sanu caught above ground on that night was taken. Where Cal asked. Tavik looked at him with the face of a boy who has been told something his whole life and has never been asked to think about it. North, he said, the country of the dead, where the dead live. Cal Renner, sitting that evening on the rim of the well, watching the sun bleed into the dunes, understood 3 things. He understood that the Maku was a machine. He understood that the country of the dead was a city. And he understood, with a small cold certainty in his chest, that whoever had built the Maku had been people like him, and that the Sanu were living in the wreckage of a delivery system that no one had remembered to switch off. He did not say any of this. He sat with his knees up and he hummed his mother's tune again, very quietly, and across the rim of the well, 12 paces away, Unien, who had been sitting alone, as she always sat alone, turned her head a fraction of an inch toward the sound. It was not much. It was the first thing. The moon was coming. He understood that from the way the Sanu began to count their things. Every household, every well, every flock they counted, and they tightened, and they did not laugh at dinner. Isulai went among them and touched the shoulders of the old and the young, and said the names of the dead. On the 3rd evening, Cal Renner found Unien at the lip of the well, looking north. She did not turn when he approached. He sat down a careful distance from her, his boots in the cooling sand, and he did not speak. The sun was almost down. The first of the two moons was already up, the small one, the white one. The big one, the red one, would rise in 2 nights, and on that night the Sanu would be deep in the wells with the lids drawn and the dunes would glow. She was looking at where it would rise. He took out his canteen, the half-liter he had been given that morning, his ration, no more, and he set it down between them. He did not push it toward her. He only set it down. After a while she looked at it, and then at him, and then back at the horizon. She did not touch it. He had been around silent people before. Soldiers who had stopped speaking after their squad died. A girl, once, on a transit station, who had not spoken since her mother had not arrived on the shuttle. He had learned that the worst thing you could do was talk at them, and the second worst thing you could do was talk about it. So he said, in his own language which she could not understand, "My mother had a song. I used to think it was about a bird. I think now it was about a man who didn't come home." She did not move. "You don't have to drink the water," he said. "I just thought you should know it was there." He sat with her until the white moon had cleared the dunes. Then he got up slowly and went down into the well. The next morning the canteen was where he had left it. It had been drunk. The night the red moon rose, Cal Renner was in the well and Unien was not. Isulai discovered it first. She moved through the chamber the way only an old woman who has lost too many things can move, quickly, but without hurry, as if hurry were a luxury for people who still had time. She touched the empty mat where Unien should have been sleeping. She turned, and her milky eyes found Cal's across the firelight, and she said only one word. "Above." He was on the ladder before he had thought about it. Tavik tried to stop him. He shook the boy off. He had been a soldier long enough that his body still knew how to take a stair 3 at a time, even after 4 years of walking and humming and waiting to die. He came up out of the well into a world that was not a world. The dunes were glowing. He had been told, but he had not understood. The sand itself was full of soft blue light, as if every grain held a tiny lantern, and the sky above was the color of nothing, not black, not red, only a deep and waiting absence. The red moon was high, and down in the long valley between the dunes, walking, very small, very slow, was Unien. She was walking north. He went after her at a run. The glowing sand hissed under his boots. He shouted her name, the word her grandmother had taught him, and she did not turn. She was walking the way her father must have walked, the way her mother must have walked. She was walking into the glow because the glow was where the lost things were, and she was tired, perhaps, of being one of the lost. He caught her by the wrist when she was perhaps 30 meters from the worst of it. He could not afterward describe what happened next except in fragments. There was a sound like a great breath drawn in. The sand under their feet rose, not as a column but as a hand of light, and the hand closed, and he was thrown clear. Flung, like a child throws away a wrapper. He hit the slope of the dune and rolled, and when he came up on his elbows with his mouth full of sand, the hand was gone, and so was she. The glow was already fading. He lay there a long time. He understood, with the part of him that had stopped being a soldier, that he had failed. He understood, with the part of him that was still a soldier, that he had been allowed to live, which meant the thing that had taken her did not consider him worth taking. He understood, with the part of him that had once been an engineer, that whatever had reached up out of the sand had been a manipulator arm, and that manipulator arms have origins, and that origins can be walked to. He got up. He went back to the well. He told Isulai. He did not know enough of her language yet to tell her gently. He said in 3 words, "The Maku, Unien." The old woman closed her eyes. For a very long moment she did not move, and Cal Renner, who had seen men receive worse news than this and stay standing, thought she might break in front of him. She did not. She opened her eyes and she said, in a voice as level as a tabletop, "Then we walk north." He said, I walk north, you stay. She looked at him with a tired, almost amused contempt. She is the last of mine, Isulai said. You walk if you wish, I walk because I must. He did not argue with her again. They left at dawn. Cal took what the Sanu would let him take, which was less than he wanted and more than he had any right to expect. A waterskin, a blade, a length of woven cord, a loaf of the hard gray bread the Sanu made from a root he had not yet learned the name of. Tavik, the boy, came to the edge of the well and watched them go with the face of someone who wanted very badly to come and had been forbidden, and Cal Renner, who had been a boy like that himself once, gave him a soldier's salute, which Tavik did not understand but received with grave dignity anyway. Isulai did not walk on stilts. She walked on her own thin legs, and she walked faster than he expected, and by the second hour he had stopped offering to slow down. They walked north for 3 days. The desert changed as they went. The dunes flattened into a hardpan of cracked white salt. Then the salt gave way to a stretch of ground glittering with what Cal at first took to be glass, and then, with a slow turn of his stomach, recognized as melted sand, the fused glaze a fusion strike leaves behind. The strike had been very old. Grass of a kind was growing through the cracks, blue-bladed and tough. Whatever had happened here had happened before the Sanu had words for it. On the second night they slept in the lee of a fallen image, a clock, the face cracked, the hands frozen at a meaningless angle. Cal lay on his back and looked up at the clock and felt the old engineer in him stirring. A clock that big was not a clock. It was an advertisement. Somewhere once, in some catalog or hollow display, there had been a smaller clock, and someone had wanted very much to sell it. And the image of it, the picture, the Sanu would say, had been beamed out to a manufacturing platform. And the platform had built the picture and not the thing, the way a stupid translator might render a metaphor as a fact. He said this to Isulai. He said it badly, in pieces of her language and pieces of his and gestures. She listened with her eyes closed and her chin on her knee. When he was done, she said, "Yes, we have always known." He blinked. Known what? That the gods were stupid, she said. That is why they left. She did not elaborate. She rolled over and went to sleep, and Cal Renner lay on his back under a clock the size of a barn and felt, for the first time in 4 years, that he was not the only adult in a room. On the third day they saw the city. It rose out of the haze the way a thought rises out of a dream, slowly in pieces, never quite committing to its own shape. Towers. There had been towers once. The tops were gone. The bottoms remained, leaning the way old teeth lean. Between them, threaded through them, the dunes had drifted in and made soft hills out of plazas. From the south, where they were, you could see what had been an avenue, broad as a river, and at the far end of it a structure that even at this distance Cal Renner recognized. A landing pad. A delivery node, the mouth of the Maku. It was not, of course, the Maku itself. The Maku was overhead in low orbit, a manufacturing platform he could not see in daylight. The mouth was only its terminus on the ground, but the mouth was where the priests would be. He had guessed that, walking. He guessed it harder now. There were people in the city. He saw them from the rise, small figures, robed, moving in slow, purposeful lines between the leaning towers. He counted maybe 60, possibly more. They did not move like the Sanu. They walked flat-footed, hunched, the way people who have not done a hard day's work in generations walk. Isulai looked at them and made a soft sound in her throat that was the Sanu equivalent. He was beginning to understand, of a laugh that was not amused. "The keepers," she said. "Of what?" "Of the book." He waited. She did not elaborate. She started down the slope toward the avenue, and he went after her, and at the mouth of the city 2 of the robed ones came out to meet them with their hands raised in a gesture that was almost, but not quite, a welcome. They were twins. Cal saw it at once. Identical to the dimple, identical to the stoop, identical even to the way they tilted their heads when they spoke. Their robes were the color of old paper. Their faces were soft and round and patient. They spoke a dialect of the Sanu tongue that was older and stranger and full of words Cal did not know. He caught only fragments. Welcome, sister, pilgrim, book. Isulai beside him was very still. The twins led them into the city. They walked between the leaning towers, and Cal saw, now that he was close, that the towers were full of windows and the windows were full of objects, stacked, sorted, ranked by color, ranked by kind. Telephones in one tower, lamps in another, an entire spire of suitcases, each one as large as a hut, leaning against each other like drunks. The keepers had not been idle. They had spent generations sorting the rain. They came at last to a low building at the foot of the great avenue. The building was new, by which Cal meant only that it had been built, not dropped, and built by hands that were too small for the scale of the materials. Crooked, loving. The keepers had hauled the paneling of a great tin shed across the dunes and made themselves a chapel out of it. Inside the chapel was the book. It was a catalogue. He recognized it the moment he saw it, the format, the dog-eared spine, the color-coded tabs along the side. A mail-order catalog, mid-22nd century, by the typeface. A document that had once been printed by the million and distributed to every household in some long-dead consumer republic, and that had washed up here, on this dead planet in the only copy left, and been mistaken for scripture. The twins led them to it with great reverence. One of them, the left, although Cal could not have said why he thought of it as the left, opened the book and read. Stainless steel watering can, he intoned. Capacity 2 liters, available in green and copper. Item code 7442. The other twin closed his eyes and repeated the words in a softer voice like a chorister. Behind them, from the shadows of the chapel, a choir of perhaps a dozen keepers in pale masks took up the line and sang it. Stainless, steel, watering, can. There was a small pause. Then from somewhere in the city, very faint, came a thud, as if something large had been set down gently by a careless hand. The twins smiled. The Maku hears, they said in unison. The Maku provides. Cal Renner, standing in the doorway of the chapel with his hand on the hilt of his knife, understood with a sick, clear precision exactly what had happened to this world. The platform overhead was listening. Whatever channel the keepers were broadcasting on, and there would be a channel, there had to be a channel, a salvaged transmitter somewhere in this chapel, was being interpreted by an automated system as a product request, and the platform was filling it. Was still filling it. Was filling it badly, at the wrong scale, with the wrong logic, because the platform had been broken for 1,000 years and was running on the last shreds of its original purpose. And these poor patient lunatics in pale robes had built a religion around the fact that the broken vending machine still gave them sweets if they sang to it. He looked at Isulai. Isulai looked back. She had not understood any of it the way he had understood it, but she had understood enough. "Where is the boy?" she said. He noted she still called Union the boy sometimes. An old habit, a way of carrying her granddaughter back to before, when the silence had not yet begun. The twins blinked at her, twin blinks. "The dreamer," they said. "My granddaughter," Isulai said. "Oh," the twins said, "she dreams beautifully, come." They had laid her on cushions. That was the first thing Cal saw, and the thing he hated most. They had laid her on cushions in a domed room at the back of the chapel, and they had dressed her in a robe the color of old paper, and they had set lamps around her in a careful ring, and her eyes were open, and her eyes were not seeing. Her hand was slack at her side. There was a thin line of dried spittle at the corner of her mouth that someone had not bothered to wipe. She was not drugged. He saw that at once. She was simply somewhere else. The way a person can be somewhere else without going anywhere, back inside her own 12 years of silence, deeper this time, because something terrible was about to happen and she had no walls left to build. The twins said, "She dreams." The Maku pulls dreams from her. We listen to what the Maku makes, and we read it in the book, and we sing back, and the Maku sings back to us. It is a great conversation. She is the conduit." "How long?" said Cal in his own language, and then again with effort in theirs. "How long has she been here?" 3 days, said the twins, pleased to be asked. "She came on the wind. The Maku brings us many things. She is the finest." He wanted very badly to hit them. He did not. He had been a soldier long enough to know that hitting the wrong people is the fastest way to lose the right ones. He knelt by Yunien. He did not touch her. He set his canteen refilled at the well of the keepers, who had been generous about water in the way people who do not work for things are always generous. He set the canteen on the floor between them. He did not speak. He hummed very softly his mother's tune. After a long moment her hand moved. A finger, the smallest finger, it twitched. He understood the twitch. He had seen it before in a different body, in a different desert. Isulai behind him said in her own voice low, "What do they intend?" Cal glanced at her. "I don't know yet." "Find out." He stood up. He turned to the twins, who were watching him with that same patient, soft, terrible kindness. He said in their language slowly, "What will you ask the Maku for next?" They beamed at him. "Tonight is a great night," they said. "The dreamer has dreamed a spiral. We have read the book. We have found the entry, item 9113. Fireworks full of lights and joy. We will sing for fireworks full of lights and joy, and the Maku will give them, and there will be a great rejoicing." Cal Renner closed his eyes. He had served once on a fire support team. He knew, the way you know your own bones, what an industrial manufacturing platform building a firework at the scale these idiots built everything else would actually be. It would be a suborbital incendiary. It would land on the city because the city was where the request had originated, and the city was where the delivery node was. It would burn everyone in it, including the people asking for it, including Yunien. He opened his eyes. "When?" he said. "At moonrise," said the twins, delighted. The red moon would rise in 3 hours. What happened in the next 3 hours, Cal Renner could not afterward have laid out as a clean sequence. He moved. That was what he did. He had been a soldier and an engineer, and now he was both at once, and they were the same person again, and the person moved. He found the transmitter. It was in a side room behind the chapel, half buried in cabling that had been spliced and respliced over 1,000 years by hands that did not understand it. A salvaged broadcast unit, perhaps from a downed ship, perhaps from the original colonists who had never come back. It was hooked into a microphone of bone and brass that the twins spoke into when they read the book. The signal went up to the Maku, up to the platform that had been listening, drowsing for a millennium, and answering whenever it was called. He could not destroy the transmitter. If he destroyed it, the request was already in queue, and the firework was coming, and there would be nothing to stop it. He had to change the request. He sat down at the transmitter. He looked at the catalog which the twins had left open on its lectern in the chapel. He flipped, very carefully with one finger, through its yellowed pages. He had perhaps an hour before the twins came back to begin the ceremony. He found what he needed on page 412. It was an entry he had been hoping blindly would exist. Old mail-order catalogs had carried everything: garden tools, kitchenware, lawn furniture. And he had remembered this from a museum visit when he was 9 years old, his hand in his mother's hand, his mother humming, and emergency kits. A whole section of emergency kits. Item 6602. Fire suppression unit, household, foam-based, self-deploying. He marked the page. Then he sat very still and waited for the twins. And when the twins came back and lit the lamps and unrolled their masks and gathered the choir for the great ceremony of the spiral and the firework, Cal Renner stood at the back of the chapel with Isulai beside him and watched them recite the wrong entry. He had moved the bookmark. It was the smallest thing. The twins, smiling, reading with their voices full of joy, read out, "Fire suppression, unit, household, foam-based, self-deploying, item 6602. The choir sang it, stainless and bright, foam-based, self-deploying. The signal went up. There was a pause, longer than the pauses had been before. The twins frowned very slightly. The choir held its note. And then from very far overhead came a sound like a great soft cough. The thing that fell on the city of the dead was not a firework. It was a fire suppression unit, household, foam-based, self-deploying, at a scale of perhaps 80 meters on a side. It came down slow on its little parachute engines, and it touched the great avenue between the leaning towers with a sound like a feather being set down on a drum. And then, in accordance with its single uncomplicated purpose, it deployed. White foam, soft and chemical and harmless, billowed out of it in a tide. It filled the avenue. It filled the chapel. It filled the streets. It engulfed the keepers, who began to shriek not with pain but with confusion, because nothing in their book had prepared them for this, and a religion is only as strong as its book. In the foam, Cal Renner picked Union up in his arms and ran. She was light. 12 years of silence and 3 days of being a conduit had hollowed her out. He carried her through the foam with Isulai gripping the hem of his coat, and at the edge of the city, where the foam had not yet reached, he set her down and looked at her, and her eyes were focused, and they were focused on him. He did not just then say anything. He did not have to. She looked at him for a long moment with the green of her eyes very wide and very awake, and she opened her mouth, and she closed her mouth, and she opened it again, and she said, "But not yet, not yet." She closed her mouth again. She was not ready. He saw it. He nodded once, the smallest nod, and he picked her up again, and they went out into the dunes with the foam billowing slow and white behind them, and the keepers chanting in confusion in the streets, and the Maku overhead drowsing happily, having delivered. They camped at the foot of a fallen image, a chair, he thought, although the legs were gone, at the southern edge of the city. Foam still drifted on the wind in tufts, like dirty wool, like the wrong kind of snow. Cal built a fire from broken slats of the chair's back, and they sat around it, the 3 of them, and Union, wrapped now in his own jacket, held a cup of warm water in 2 hands and would not drink. Isulai watched her granddaughter the way an old woman watches a candle she has been guarding all night. "She will speak when she speaks," she said at last to Cal without looking at him. "Do not press." "I wasn't going to." "You are a man, men press." He almost laughed. It was the first time in 4 years he had almost laughed at anything anyone had said. He did not press. He sat with his back to the fallen chair, and he looked north at the city, and beyond it at the dunes that went on, and he thought about the Maku. The Maku was still up there. He had stopped the firework. He had not stopped the Maku. The keepers, when they finished panicking, would dry off and find their book and find their twins and resume their ceremony, because that was what they had been doing for 1,000 years, and a man does not give up his life's work because of one bad delivery. They would sing again. The Maku would answer. And one day, perhaps not soon, but one day, they would sing for something terrible enough that the foam would not save anyone. He had to shut it down. He could not shut it down from the ground. He sat very still for a long time, and he understood, with the cold, dry click of an old machine slipping into gear, that there was a way. The Maku listened to the chapel, because the chapel was where the signal originated. The Maku would, in principle, listen to any signal on the right frequency, with the right protocol, with the right priority code. The original colonial expeditions, the ones that had built this platform before the Pale Years, would have had a master override. Every automated supply platform had one. You could not run a manufacturing arm in low orbit without an emergency cease command, because if you could not stop the arm would one day drop a refrigerator on a school. The override would have a code. The code would have been distributed to the colonial authority. The colonial authority was, by every indication, dead and had been dead for centuries, and the code with it. But he had been an engineer, he had been a soldier. He had been, before either of those things, a boy who took apart radios. He knew that almost every colonial-era platform of that vintage had a manual reset that did not require the code, only physical access. You could go up and shut it down by hand. He looked north. The city of the dead was the only place in this hemisphere that still had infrastructure tall enough to launch from. The keepers had a tower. He had seen it from the rise, a blackened, leaning, half-collapsed launch spire that the keepers had wisely chosen not to worship, because the keepers worshipped what they could understand, and a launch spire was not in the book. He could climb it. He could climb it and find, among the ruined caches at its base, the last of the colonial ascent vehicles, and he could check whether one of them still had fuel, and he could go up. He would probably not come back. He sat for a long time with that. Then he looked at Yunien, who had not drunk her water but was holding it still, and he understood that there was a different kind of probably not coming back, and that he had been doing it for 4 years. He stood up. He was about to say something. He was not sure what when Yunien spoke. Her voice was very small. It was small and dry and cracked at the edges, like an old door opening. It was a Sanu voice. He had not heard a Sanu voice from a young throat in months. The children at the well had all been silent around him, and it said one word. Stay. He sat back down. He sat back down so fast his knees clicked. Isulai across the fire had gone absolutely still. She did not look at her granddaughter. She did not look at anything. She was holding herself, Cal understood, with the iron self-control of a woman who has been waiting 12 years for this moment and has decided that she will not be the thing that breaks it. Yunien looked at the fire. She did not look at either of them. Stay, she said again, in a voice slightly stronger this time. Don't go up. Her dialect was a child's dialect, 12 years out of date, the dialect of a 7-year-old who had simply stopped using it on the day it stopped being useful. It was beautiful. It was also broken. She had to pause between words. I have to go up, he said gently. I have to turn it off. You will fall. Maybe. You will fall, she said again more firmly. My father went into the glow, he fell. My mother went after him, she fell. He understood then. He understood she had not been quiet for 12 years because she was broken. She had been quiet for 12 years because every time she had spoken before, someone had walked into a glow and not come back, and silence had seemed the only safe thing left to give to the people she loved. She had broken silence for him. She had broken it because he was about to walk into the glow. He had to be very careful now. He had to be very, very careful. He said, Yunien, will you come with me? Across the fire Isulai's head snapped up. But Cal did not look at the old woman. He looked at the girl. The girl looked back. I am not your father, he said. I am not your mother. I am not a god who walks into the light. I am an engineer. I fix things. I am going up to fix the thing that took you. I would like you to come with me because you and your grandmother are the only 2 people on this planet who know me, and I do not want to die without anyone knowing me. He had not meant to say the last part. It surprised him. It was true. Yunien looked at him for a long time. Will you come back? She said finally. I will try. Promise. I promise to try. She set the cup of water down on the sand very carefully, the way a child sets down something precious. Then she stood up. She was very tall when she stood, taller than he had thought, and the firelight caught the down on her jaw, and Cal Renner thought with a sudden absurd grief that she was going to be beautiful, and he was probably not going to live to see it. All right, she said. Isulai across the fire made a small sound. It was the sound an old tree makes when the wind finally takes the last leaf. It was not grief. It was not joy. It was both. "Both of you," the old woman said. "Both of you go, I will wait at the well. I have waited longer for less." The launch spire was a ruin. They reached it the next morning, crossing the foam-streaked avenues of the city of the dead. The keepers, as Cal had predicted, had recovered. He could hear them faintly in the chapel chanting again, more nervously than before, but chanting. They had not yet realized that he had moved the bookmark. They would in time. He hoped in time that they would also realize other things. He led Union past the chapel by a side avenue. She walked with her head down and her hand in his, and her hand was thin and cold and tight, and she did not speak again because she was saving it. The ascent vehicles were at the foot of the spire, 6 of them. 5 were corroded beyond hope. The 6th, squat, scarred, half buried in the dunes, Cal brushed sand off until he could read the panel. Colonial lifeboat, model M7, fuel reserve 41%, last serviced, a date so old he refused to do the arithmetic. 41% would get them up. It would not, he understood, get them down. He did not tell her that. He sealed her into the secondary seat and he ran the ancient pre-flight by feel, by half-remembered procedure, by hum, his mother's tune, low in his throat, the same shape in the air he had given her the first night in the well. She heard it. She closed her eyes. The M7 went up at noon. The Maku platform was where he had calculated it would be. He matched orbits with the dumb persistence of a man who had nothing left to lose. He cracked the airlock with a manual override that had not been used in a millennium and still worked, because old engineers had built things to last when they meant them to last. He went into the platform with Union behind him, her hand still in his, and he walked through corridors lit only by the dim blue of failing emergency strips, past racks of manufacturing arms drowsing in their cradles, past the great empty bays where the deliveries were assembled, and he found, at the heart of it, the bridge. The bridge was small, older than he had imagined, a console of analog switches and one great red lever under a glass cover that had not been broken because nobody, in 1,000 years, had thought to break it. The lever was labeled, in a language he knew, "Manufacturing Halt." He lifted the glass. He looked at Union. She looked back at him, the green of her eyes very steady, and she said very clearly in her broken 12-year-old's dialect, "Do it." He pulled the lever. Somewhere in the bones of the platform a great sigh went up, the sigh of 1,000 half-built telephones and watering cans and chairs and clocks settling down forever. The blue emergency strips dimmed by another quarter. A new light came up on the console, small and green, HALTED. The Maku was off. It would never drop anything again. He stood for a moment with his hand on the lever, and he understood with a peace he had not expected that he had done it. He had done it. The cult would die quietly because their book would never sing back. The dunes would not glow. The dead city would stay dead, and the Sanu would walk on stilts and herd their birds, and the children would never again grow up afraid of the moon. Then he turned to Union and he said, "Now we get home." The lifeboat had not enough fuel for a powered descent, but it had a parachute system, original spec, never used, never tested. Cal Renner, engineer, 2nd class, formerly a soldier, had spent 4 years in a desert and had learned, among many things, that what you cannot do alone you can sometimes do with one other person who is willing to hold your hand while you do it. He rigged the chute. He briefed her. She listened with the absorbed seriousness of a child who has been listening, in silence, for 12 years, and has stored every word she ever heard. They went down at dawn the next morning. It was a bad descent. The chute deployed late. They hit hard. Cal broke his ankle on the impact and his collarbone on the roll. Union lighter came down better and dragged him 3 kilometers across the dunes with a strength she did not know she had, humming all the way his mother's tune. Isulai found them at the well. She came up out of the ground in the long copper light of evening, and she put a hand on her granddaughter's head and a hand on Cal's good shoulder, and she said, in a voice that was not a young woman's voice and never had been but was, in that moment, somehow the youngest sound he had ever heard. "You came back." Yunien said, "Yes." It was the second word she had spoken in 12 years. The dunes did not glow that month, nor the next, nor any after. Cal Renner mended slow. The ankle was a long ankle. The collarbone was a longer collarbone. He sat at the lip of the well in the long evenings while the Sanu came up and counted each other and went out to find their birds, and Tavik, 15 and proud and quietly forgiving of having been left behind, taught him new words: wind, healing, friend. There was no word in the Sanu tongue for what Cal was exactly in the tribe. They did not have words for adoption, only for kinship, and kinship was something you did, not something you declared. So they did it, and he was kin. Yunien spoke more after. Not freely, not the way other people spoke. She was, Cal came to understand, a person who had decided early in her life that words were expensive, and she had never reversed that decision. She had only decided for him and for her grandmother that some words were worth the cost. She spoke at evening. She spoke at meals. She did not speak in crowds. She hummed his mother's tune sometimes, and one evening, sitting on the rim of the well with her feet in the sand, she sang it, the whole shape of it, with words she had made up in her own dialect, words about a man who had not come home and a man who had, and Isulai, hearing it, closed her eyes and did not open them for a long time. Far overhead, drifting in the dark on its silent platform, the Maku slept. It would not wake again. The desert was the desert. The dunes drifted as dunes drift. And in a well in the cold ground, a girl who had been silent for 12 years sat beside a man who had been alone for 4. And they did not say very much, because they did not have to, because the human thing, the small stubborn thing the Sanu had not had a word for, and the keepers had not had a song for, and the gods had not bothered to leave behind, had already been done.